The galaxy had long been ruled by the great civilizations of the stars, beings of immense power and intelligence who had seen the rise and fall of countless species. The humans, once considered primitive and insignificant, had always been an outlier in the grand scheme of things. Their wars, struggles, and fragile alliances had led to a reputation of being unpredictable, chaotic, something of a nuisance. But that was before the war. Before the invasion. The Kolthar, a race of telepathic conquerors, had come to Earth in the dead of night. Ships the size of cities descended from the sky, their sleek forms casting ominous shadows across the planet's surface. Their technology was centuries beyond anything humanity had ever seen, and their armies swarmed over Earth's borders with ruthless precision. Within weeks, major governments had crumbled, and the human race was left on the brink of annihilation. At first, the Kolthar assumed humanity would surrender as others had. They could communicate with minds, bending the will of lesser species to their control. But when they attempted their first telepathic sweep of Earth's population, they found something entirely unexpected. A resistance, born from a simple spark of human defiance. Among the few who stood against the invaders was Captain Alina Voss, a decorated military leader and strategist. She had seen the worst of humanity's wars, but she knew that their true strength lay not in numbers or technology, but in their resilience, their capacity to adapt and endure. She gathered the remnants of Earth's forces, scattered, broken, but united in purpose. As she stood on the rooftop of a half-destroyed skyscraper in the heart of a shattered city, Alina looked out over the war-torn horizon. The Kolthar had underestimated them, assuming humans would crumble under the pressure. They hadn't counted on the fact that every human being, whether they realized it or not, was a survivor. And now, they were fighting back. Captain Voss. The voice crackled over her comm. It was Lieutenant Kruz, one of her most trusted officers. We've received intel. The Kolthar are planning to deploy their final weapon, a massive planet-destroying device. We got to stop them. Her heart pounded. This was it, the moment they had been dreading. But Alina Voss didn't hesitate. She had faced overwhelming odds before, and she knew that humanity's greatest strength was the ability to surprise. They might not have the superior technology, but they had something that no conqueror could predict: the will to fight. Prepare the team, she said, voice steady. This ends tonight. Humanity's fight isn't over. Not by a long shot. And with that, the resistance, once a small faction, began to rally. They would rise together, united not by technology or military might, but by the simple truth that when humanity was pushed to its breaking point, there was no force in the galaxy strong enough to stop them. The moon hung low over the smoldering ruins of what had once been Chicago. The night air was thick with the scent of ash and burning wreckage, but beneath the despair, something else was stirring. A quiet, unshakable hope. The Kolthar had underestimated humanity, and that error would be their undoing. Captain Alina Voss stood at the front of a hastily constructed command center hidden deep within the bowels of an old subway station. Around her, a small group of soldiers and strategists were finalizing plans for their first major assault against the Kolthar's weapon, the devastating device that could obliterate Earth in an instant. The Resistance had learned that the Kolthar had established a heavily guarded base beneath the ruins of the city, a facility so fortified that most of their scouts had written it off as unreachable. But Alina was different. She refused to believe anything was beyond the reach of humanity's will. "Intel's confirmed," Lieutenant Kruz said, pulling up a holographic map of the facility. His fingers danced over the interface, zooming in on the intricate layout. "The weapon is housed here, under the central building. We got to disable it before they can activate it." Alina studied the map for a moment, her mind calculating the risks, but also weighing the potential for success. They had very few assets, no advanced chips, no powerful tech to rival the Kolthar, but they had something the invaders could never account for: adaptability, creativity, resourcefulness. "Gather the team," she ordered. "We're going in with everything we've got." Kruz nodded, and began issuing commands. Soon, Alina's elite strike team was assembled. Soldiers, engineers, and even former scientists who had once been civilians. Together, they represented the entire breadth of humanity's ingenuity and determination. They were a motley crew, but they all shared one thing: an unbreakable belief in the possibility of victory. As the team gathered their gear, Alina turned to face the soldiers, her voice ringing clear in the subterranean chamber. "We don't have the luxury of second chances," she said. "The Kolthar are ruthless, but they're also arrogant. They think we'll just roll over. We're going to show them how wrong they are. Tonight, we take the fight to them." The team moved out, slipping into the streets of the ruined city under the cover of darkness. As they approached the Kolthar base, the full scale of the invaders' power became evident. Massive warships hovered overhead, their menacing silhouettes cutting across the sky like predators. Patrols of Kolthar soldiers marched through the streets, their telepathic ability scanning for any sign of human resistance. But the humans were clever. Using makeshift cloaking devices, scavenged from destroyed Kolthar tech, they infiltrated the periphery of the facility undetected. Alina's heart raced as they neared the central structure, a towering building of black stone, pulsing with an unnatural energy. They were close, too close. "We're going in through the service tunnel," Alina whispered, pointing to a rusted hatch near the base of the building. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. They moved quickly and quietly, entering the tunnel with the same resolve that had driven humanity for millennia. Every step they took brought them closer to the weapon. The Kolthar had no idea they were coming. Alina's mind raced as she considered the next phase of their plan. Time was running out. The weapon would be activated soon. But she knew one thing for certain: humanity would not go down without a fight. The tunnel was damp and narrow, the air thick with the smell of mildew and stale earth. The resistance moved in near silence, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls as they advanced deeper into the heart of the Kolthar stronghold. Alina's thoughts were laser-focused. Every move they made needed to be precise. One misstep could cost them everything. The plan was simple: infiltrate the facility, disable the weapon, and escape before the Kolthar could mount a full counteroffensive. But as they neared the central chambers, the tension in the air thickened. The Kolthar's technology was far superior, their telepathic abilities capable of detecting intruders miles away. Yet, somehow, the humans had managed to stay undetected. "Almost there," Alina whispered over her comms, her voice low but firm. Lieutenant Cruz, carrying a backpack of explosives, nodded silently. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of excitement in his eyes. The strike team had been through countless drills, but this was different. This wasn't practice, it was real. They were going to take on the Kolthar head-to-head. Just as they reached a heavy steel door leading into the facility's main control room, something shifted in the atmosphere. A faint hum reverberated through the walls, followed by an eerie silence. Alina's instincts screamed at her to stop. "Trap," she hissed under her breath. Before anyone could react, the door slid open with a sudden, deafening screech, revealing a vast chamber filled with Kolthar soldiers, their glowing eyes trained on the humans. "Ambush," Alina barked, raising her weapon and opening fire. The resistance team responded with swift, coordinated movements, guns blazing, throwing grenades, and diving behind cover. The Kolthar soldiers, towering and lean, retaliated with their own advanced energy weapons, their glowing plasma bolts tearing through the walls. Alina ducked behind a pillar, narrowly avoiding a blast that singed her shoulder. The pain was sharp, but she ignored it. There was no room for hesitation now. "Cruz, get the charge planted," she shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We hold them off." Cruz nodded, sprinting across the battlefield, his every movement precise. The Kolthar soldiers were formidable, but they weren't prepared for the unpredictability of human tactics. While the Kolthar were accustomed to overpowering their enemies with sheer might and superior technology, the humans fought with something far more dangerous: desperation. Explosions echoed through the chamber as one of the Kolthar's energy shields fizzled out under the weight of a well-placed rocket. The resistance soldiers, empowered by adrenaline, pushed forward, their courage outmatching the invaders' arrogance. But the Kolthar weren't going to let this challenge go unanswered. A figure emerged from the shadows, larger than the others, its armored form exuding an oppressive, almost tangible presence. The Kolthar general, a being of immense telepathic power, had arrived. With a flick of its wrist, the general's telekinetic ability sent a shockwave through the room, slamming the resistance soldiers to the ground. Alina gasped for breath as she fought to stay conscious, feeling the crushing weight of an invisible force pressing down on her chest. "You think you can defeat us?" The general's voice echoed in Alina's mind, cold and alien. "Your species is weak. You will bow before us, or you will die." Her vision blurred, but through the haze, Alina saw the others struggling to their feet. She could hear their resolve in their gritted teeth, in their battle cries. And that was when it hit her. The Kolthar had made the ultimate mistake. They'd underestimated humanity's greatest weapon, the will to fight back. "No," Alina muttered through clenched teeth. "We don't bow." With a roar, she pushed through the pressure on her chest, ignoring the blood trickling from her wounds. She staggered to her feet and charged at the general, her weapon raised high, ready to deliver humanity's defiant message. The battle was far from over, but Alina knew one thing. The Kolthar had awakened a beast they could never hope to control. The chamber shook with the aftermath of the blast. Smoke filled the air as the Kolthar general loomed over the battlefield, its telekinetic powers still crackling through the atmosphere. Alina's body felt like it was being crushed under the weight of an invisible hand, but her mind was razor-sharp, focused on the one thing that mattered: survival. With a snarl, she forced herself to her feet. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, but she barely registered the pain. The resistance was scattered, struggling to regroup, and the Kolthar general was advancing with terrifying speed. "You are insignificant," the general's voice echoed in Alina's mind. A dark, mocking whisper. "Your species is nothing." But Alina wasn't listening. Her heart pounded in her ears, her focus solely on the weapon that could save them all. Crews had successfully planted the explosives earlier, but the final detonation was still miles away, and there was no way they'd make it if they didn't act fast. "Crews," Alina shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Now." The sound of a detonation timer rang out from the far side of the room. Crews had activated the countdown. The resistance had one final chance to end the Kolthar threat, and it had to be now. With a roar, Alina turned and charged straight at the Kolthar general. The creature's glowing eyes locked on her, a cruel smirk curling its lips. It raised its hand, and the pressure in the room intensified, pushing Alina back. "You dare defy us," the general hissed, its telepathic power building to a deafening crescendo. Alina's breath caught as the force grew stronger, crushing her chest and making her vision blur. But through the pain, she saw something small, barely visible beneath the chaos. A flicker of light in the shadows. Crews, working quickly, his fingers a blur as he entered the override code to disable the central weapon. In that moment, Alina understood. The fight wasn't just about defeating the Kolthar. It was about protecting what humanity was, their ability to adapt, to outthink their enemies, to never back down. She wasn't fighting for victory alone. She was fighting for the future of all humankind. "Crews," Alina shouted again, forcing her words through the pain. "Hurry." The general's power tightened around Alina's chest like a vice, but she refused to collapse. "You are weak," the Kolthar snarled. "You will fall, just like the others." But Alina's eyes narrowed. Her mind screamed with defiance. She had seen humanity at its worst, at its most vulnerable, but she had also seen its greatest strength, the ability to survive, to rise when everything else had crumbled. "This is not the end, not while we still breathe." Her fingers clenched around the weapon in her hand, and with a ferocious cry, she lunged forward. In one fluid motion, she fired directly at the general's exposed flank. The shot struck, not with the precision of advanced technology, but with the raw ferocity of humanity's will. The general staggered, howling in rage, its telekinetic grip faltering for a fraction of a second. That was all the opening the resistance needed. With one final, desperate push, crews hit the override button, and the explosives planted throughout the facility detonated in a deafening roar. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the Colthar general, caught in the explosion's shockwave, was thrown back into the chaos of the collapsing facility. The explosion sent shockwaves through the building, the tremors rattling the walls as the Colthar's weapon, the weapon that could have destroyed Earth, was destroyed in a brilliant flash of light. Elena, barely conscious, stumbled to her feet. She could hear the others around her, struggling to regroup, but there was no time to savor the victory. The Colthar were relentless, and they would be back. But for now, humanity had won. As the smoke cleared and the rumbling subsided, Elena locked eyes with Kruz, who was breathing heavily but grinning. "Let's finish this," she said, her voice grim but filled with resolve. They had dealt a devastating blow to the Colthar, but the war was far from over. Now it was time to turn the tide and show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. The battlefield lay in ruin. The once imposing Colthar stronghold was now nothing more than a smoldering crater. Fires raged in the distance, and the ground trembled with the aftershocks of the explosion that had leveled the weapon. But amid the devastation, something else began to stir, a new sense of purpose, born from the ashes. Elena stood among the wreckage, bloodied and bruised but unbroken. Her team, though battered, had fought with a fury that even the Colthar hadn't anticipated. They had delivered a crippling blow to the invaders, and for the first time, Elena allowed herself a breath of relief. But it was short-lived. The war was far from over. "We need to move, Captain." Kruz's voice broke through her thoughts, urgent. His eyes were scanning the sky. "More Colthar ships are approaching. They know what we've done." Elena didn't need to look up to know Kruz was right. The distant hum of incoming ships grew louder, and dark silhouettes began to materialize against the horizon. The Colthar would never let this defeat go unanswered. "Damn it," Elena muttered under her breath. She could feel the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. The victory was a significant one, but it wasn't enough to end the war. Not yet. "We'll regroup at the extraction point," Elena ordered, her voice steady despite the urgency in her mind. "No time to waste. We've got to keep moving." The strike team quickly assembled, gathering their weapons and gear. Despite the exhaustion, they moved with a practiced efficiency that had saved them countless times. They knew what was at stake. They knew that Earth's survival depended on their ability to outwit and outblast the Colthar. As they made their way toward the extraction point, Elena's thoughts raced. The Colthar weren't just a force to be reckoned with. They were a species on the verge of annihilating entire worlds. But something had shifted. The humans had proven they could stand up to them. For the first time, Elena saw a crack in the Colthar's unshakable confidence. "Captain," Kruz said as he fell into step beside her, "do you think we can actually win this?" Elena glanced at him, her expression hardening. "We've already won. We've proven that we're not just some insignificant species that can be wiped out without a second thought. If we can keep them on the defensive, we've got a chance, and I'll be damned if we don't take it." Kruz nodded, a determined fire in his eyes. "Then let's make sure they don't forget who they're dealing with." The rest of the team echoed his sentiment. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message to the Colthar and anyone else who thought they could wipe humanity out. Earth was not some backwater planet. Humanity wasn't just a species to be conquered. It was a force to be reckoned with. As they reached the extraction point, the reality of their situation hit them once more. The Colthar ships were closing in, their massive forms blocking out the stars. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, but there was no fear, just resolve. "Get us out of here," she ordered. The pilot of their transport ship responded immediately, the engines humming to life as the craft lifted off from the surface, barely avoiding the incoming barrage from the Kolthar fleet. As they ascended into the sky, Alina looked out the viewport at the distant battlefield below. The fight wasn't over. But humanity had proven something to the galaxy that day. They had proven that no matter how many times they were pushed to the brink, they would never stop fighting. And if the Kolthar thought they had seen the last of humanity's resistance, they had another thing coming. The transport ship cut through the cold vacuum of space, its engines a steady hum as it carried the strike team to the safety of a hidden base on the far side of the moon. Alina's mind, however, remained back on Earth, lingering on the battlefield they had just left behind. The Kolthar fleet had been forced to retreat, if only temporarily, but it was clear that this war was far from over. The strike team had dealt them a devastating blow, but the Kolthar were relentless, and their thirst for conquest had only grown stronger. As the transport docked at the underground base, Alina disembarked, her boots hitting the cold concrete floor with a dull thud. The team followed in a grim silence, their faces marked with the weariness of battle, but also a steely resolve. They had proven they could strike back, but now came the most difficult part, planning their next move. Inside the base's war room, an array of holographic displays flickered to life as Alina approached. The resistance leadership, comprising some of the last remaining high-ranking officers from Earth's military, gathered around a large table. Lieutenant Kruz, ever loyal, was already at her side, scanning the intel as it appeared on the screen. "We've got a problem," Kruz said, his voice tense. "The Kolthar fleet may have pulled back for now, but we're seeing signs that they're regrouping. They've called for reinforcements from other sectors of the galaxy. If we don't strike again soon, they'll be back in full force." Alina frowned. "They're not going to let us off the hook that easily. We've given them a taste of what Earth can do, but now they'll come for us with everything they've got. We need to stay ahead of them." General Sutherland, a grizzled veteran who had survived countless battles, stepped forward. "We've got limited resources. The Kolthar have far more ships, more firepower. They're not a race that will make the same mistake twice." Alina nodded, but there was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. "They've underestimated us before. They think we're weak, but we're far from it. We've got the element of surprise on our side, and I'll be damned if we let them retake Earth." The room fell silent as Alina's words sank in. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about reclaiming Earth. The humans were no longer scattered remnants of a lost cause. They were a force that could push back against an empire that had thought them insignificant. And they would show the Kolthar that their arrogance would be their undoing. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Alina continued, her voice gaining strength. "Find their weakest point and exploit it. The Kolthar are too overconfident in their superiority. They won't see us coming. We'll strike at their supply lines, their reinforcements. We'll make sure they don't have the resources to continue this war." Kruz was already pulling up a series of charts and projections on the holographic display. "We've identified a key Kolthar supply depot in the Alpha Centauri system. It's heavily guarded, but if we can hit it, we can cut off a major supply route. We cripple their ability to launch any major attacks on Earth." Alina studied the map carefully. The plan was risky. Attacking a well-guarded Kolthar supply base was no small feat, but she wasn't about to let fear dictate their next move. The humans had already proven their ability to adapt and strike when it mattered most. "Do it," Alina ordered, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "We go after it. Now." The room buzzed with activity as the planning began in earnest. The team's morale had been boosted by their earlier victory, and now the full weight of humanity's resolve was being funneled into this next mission. The Kolthar had made the mistake of underestimating them once. They wouldn't make it again. As the last of the strategies were finalized and the team prepped for their next strike, Alina allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be many more battles to come. But one thing was certain, the humans weren't going to roll over. The Kolthar had ignited something inside them, a fire that wouldn't be snuffed out so easily. The resistance wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of Earth, and they were prepared to take the fight to the heart of the Kolthar Empire. The transport ship cut through the cold void of space, its hull a silent ghost against the backdrop of stars. The Alpha Centauri system loomed ahead, home to one of the Kolthar's most critical supply depots. It was well guarded, heavily fortified, and located within an asteroid belt, providing natural cover for the enemy fleet. But the humans weren't deterred. They had learned to fight in the shadows, to exploit every advantage. Elena stood at the helm of the ship, her eyes locked on the coordinates, her mind running through the mission's details one last time. The plan was straightforward: infiltrate the depot, sabotage their supplies, and escape before the Kolthar reinforcements arrived. It was a high-risk mission, but the payoff could cripple the Kolthar's ability to wage war. ETA in 5 minutes, Kruz said, standing beside her. His voice was calm, but Elena could sense the tension in his posture. He had fought by her side through hell and back, but this was different. This wasn't a mere raid. This was an all-or-nothing strike. Stay focused, Elena replied, her voice steady. We've got one shot at this. If we mess up, there's no going back. Around them, the rest of the strike team prepared for the assault. Soldiers checked weapons, engineers double-checked sabotage charges, and the tech specialists made sure the ship's cloaking systems were in top condition. Every detail was critical. If they were detected before reaching the depot, the mission would fail. The silence of space was broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engines as they entered the asteroid field. Elena watched the view screen as the large, jagged rocks passed by, some so close that she could feel the ship shudder with each collision. Then, it happened. A pulse of red light suddenly flashed on the sensors. Warning, the ship's AI announced in a neutral tone. Detected, Kolthar patrol fleet. 2 warships on intercept course. Elena's blood ran cold. They hadn't expected the Kolthar to have such a strong presence here. These warships were likely part of the depot's defensive forces. It wasn't just a supply base, it was a fortress. Damn it, Elena muttered. All ships, initiate evasive maneuvers. Get us into the asteroid field. We need to lose them before they can send a signal. The crew scrambled into action, quickly adjusting the ship's course. Elena's heart raced as the ship veered through the asteroid belt, narrowly dodging massive chunks of rock. The Kolthar ships pursued, their weapons lighting up with deadly precision. Red beams of plasma lanced through the space around them, missing by mere meters as the humans expertly navigated the asteroid field. We're not going to outrun them, Kruz said, his face tight with concentration. We need to engage. No, Elena replied firmly. We don't have time for a firefight. If we can't lose them, we'll have to make our stand at the depot. The ship's AI issued a series of warnings, indicating a system overload as the Kolthar ships closed in. The fight was inevitable now. But before Elena could make her next command, the ship's cloaking system flickered and a message flashed on the screen. Cloak integrity failing. Recalibrating. The Kolthar had detected their position. Brace for impact. Elena shouted as the ship veered hard, sending the crew into a chaotic spin. A Kolthar warship fired again, narrowly missing their port side. The ship's hull groaned, but the humans held their ground, pushing forward into the heart of the depot. Prepare to deploy ground forces, Elena ordered. Kruz, you're with me. We hit the supply storage first, then move on the fuel cells. Everyone else, cover the escape route. The ship plunged through the depot's defenses, skimming the surface of the asteroid base. They could see the massive Kolthar storage containers, brimming with fuel and weapons, but their time was running out. The ship was now fully visible on the Kolthar sensors, and reinforcements would be inbound soon. Go, Elena barked as the team scrambled to disembark. They had no more time for subtlety. The depot was a war zone now, Alina led the charge through the reinforced hangar doors, her weapon raised. The strike team poured out, engaging the Kolthar guards in a storm of gunfire and explosions. It was chaos, but it was chaos they could control. The humans were a well-oiled machine, fast, efficient, and merciless. "We've got 30 minutes until those warships arrive," Kruz shouted over the comms. "Let's make it count." The resistance team raced through the base, planting charges, sabotaging weapon caches, and ensuring that the Kolthar wouldn't be able to launch another attack for weeks. Every step was measured, every move deliberate. There was no turning back now. In the final moments of their mission, Alina watched as the last of the charges were set. They had crippled the depot, and soon, the entire Kolthar supply chain would be in shambles. But as the team regrouped and prepared to escape, Alina knew that this victory would be short-lived. The Kolthar would retaliate, and when they did, humanity would need to be ready. The ship tore through the asteroid belt, barely avoiding the incoming fire from the Kolthar warships. The mission had been a success. They had crippled the Kolthar supply depot and dealt a severe blow to their military infrastructure. But as Alina looked out the viewport at the approaching Kolthar fleet, she knew they couldn't outrun what was coming. They had made their stand. Now they would face the consequences. "Reinforcements are on their way." Kruz's voice crackled through the comms. "Kolthar fleet is mobilizing for a full-scale counterattack. We're not getting out of this without a fight." Alina's mind raced. They had taken out one of the Kolthar's primary resources, but the enemy was relentless. The Kolthar weren't going to let this slip by. They would come for Earth in full force, and this time, there would be no easy escape. "We're not running," Alina said, her voice sharp and steady. "We hold the line here. We make them pay for every inch they take from us." The ship's engines groaned under the pressure as they veered toward the edge of the asteroid field, trying to buy time. The Kolthar ships loomed on the horizon, their dark forms blocking out the stars. The humans had already proven themselves capable of striking back. Now it was time to show the Kolthar that their empire would not be built on the blood of Earth. The ship's crew scrambled to prepare for the inevitable. The weapons systems hummed to life, shields were reinforced, and the team gathered in the command center for one last briefing. "This isn't just about survival anymore," Alina said, her voice unwavering. "We've proven that we can outsmart them, that we can fight back. But now we're fighting for Earth's future. We need to make them bleed. We need to show the galaxy that humanity is more than just an obstacle. It's a force to be reckoned with." The team, battered but resolute, nodded in agreement. They had already sacrificed so much to get to this point. The Kolthar had underestimated them time and again, and now it was time to turn the tables. As the first of the Kolthar ships closed in, Alina made the call. "Fire everything we've got," she commanded. The ship's weapons unleashed in a barrage of plasma and laser fire, streaking through space toward the Kolthar fleet. The battle was fierce, and for a moment, it seemed as if the humans might have a chance to turn the tide. The Kolthar warships retaliated with devastating force, but Alina's crew fought with a desperation born from the knowledge that this was their final chance to protect everything they loved. "Captain, we've got a problem," Cruz called out. "The Kolthar are flanking us. We're going to be surrounded." Alina gritted her teeth. "We're not giving up. We hold the center. We buy time for the others to escape." The team fought like warriors who had nothing left to lose. Explosions rocked the ship as their shields faltered under the relentless assault, but they held their ground. Alina, standing at the front of the command center, could hear the echoes of gunfire from the hangar bay as the resistance soldiers launched boarding pods to take out enemy vessels up close. They were making a final stand. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for honor. "Everyone to the escape pods," Alina ordered, her voice cold but filled with the weight of responsibility. "We've done everything we can. Earth still has a chance. Get back to Earth and warn them." Her team was already moving, preparing to evacuate to the last remaining safe locations. But Elena, Kruz, and a few others stayed behind to give them time. The Kolthar were closing in. It was clear now. Their fleet was overwhelming, and they would soon outnumber the resistance. But as the battle raged on, Elena couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They had fought with every ounce of their being. The Kolthar might win this battle, but they had no idea what they had awakened in humanity. The spark of defiance would never die. Elena turned to Kruz, her eyes locking with his. "No matter what happens here," she said, "we've won. They'll remember what happened today. They'll remember that Earth was never a planet to be taken lightly." With a final nod, she turned to face the battle unfolding outside, knowing the resistance had given it everything they had. The Kolthar might have conquered worlds, but they had never faced humanity before. And that was something they would never forget. As the Kolthar fleet moved in for the kill, Elena made her peace with the inevitable. The war was far from over, but the resistance would live on. Humanity would rise again.